Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim yatkripa tamaham bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhobhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. So I'll start with a little full disclosure. I had very mixed feelings when Padmanabha Maharaj asked me to do this. He told me that he wanted November to be Kartik themed, and he asked if I would speak about the Rasa-lila. And I really like the idea of a Kartik themed program during this month. I really did not like the idea of me, of all people, speaking on the Rasa-lila. But I took it as an instruction from my gurus, and have been in a state of panic ever since, pretty much, because this is such a confidential topic, and I am so far from any confidential circles. However, like all of us, I have the pleasure of having the association of many wonderful devotees who are closer to such circles, at least. And so I'm taking shelter of them, and especially my own beloved spiritual master, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, my Shiksha Guru and Sannyas Guru, Swami Tripurari, and all our previous acharyas. And there was an added note of urgency, I guess, in my prayers. Got a question from Makrura. Okay, no worries. So there was I mean, I offer these same prayers every time I speak, and it's generally quite an internal thing. I mean, I really go into my heart when I do that. Actually, do because I feel helpless, but I feel particularly helpless now, and I've gone through maybe a dozen different ways I might start this series, and none of them seemed to work for me. So I'm just going to kind of go with my heart and hope that my guides will bring us. Oh, we need to ask Govinda Dasi to unmute. How do we do that? I don't even know if I have the power to do that. Oh, maybe it just happened. Magic. So I'm just kind of going to go with my heart and depend very much on my guides. One devotee, I mentioned my emotional condition approaching this project, especially yesterday as the time drew closer, to one of the devotees who associates with me. And this devotee told me about reminded me of a couple of instances where she felt helpless in the face. She obviously wasn't able to pull off the tasks that she had been given. And she just kind of like dug inside and begged Srila Prabhupada to please help her do it. And it worked. So this devotee was encouraging me, just go within and take shelter of Srila Prabhupada and it will be okay. So based on that, we can start. That disclaimer aside, usually you tell people, don't say, well, I'm the wrong person to ask about this, or I don't really know what I'm talking about, but what can I do? I'm helpless in this particular situation. So probably the first question that arises is, how can we about Rasa-lila like this? After all, we have so many admonitions from Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur especially against delving into topics that are over our head. So there's probably a whole list. I looked at some of them. But there's a whole list of quotations from Srila Prabhupada where he warned the devotees against discussing the Rasa-lila. And many of us may know that there was a time in the mid-1970s when amongst devotees, probably mainly amongst devotees who were, particularly those who were involved in project of getting out 17 volumes of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in 2 months, how among those devotees, there developed something that became known as the Gopi Bhava Club, where they would get together and they would read certain sections together of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Srila Prabhupada was, he was not amused, he was not pleased. And he let these devotees know that in no uncertain terms. He was very plain, very strong in his condemnation of devotees getting together simply for relishing things, so-called relishing things, sharing things for which they weren't really qualified. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also was very, very, very strong on this. And all his followers, most of his followers anyway, have been very strong on not getting too excited about discussing such intimate topics. There's one story we hear sometimes about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Approaching his guru and father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, suggesting that they print Govinda Lilamrita, I think it was. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, sure, fine. We'll print 2 copies, one for me and one for you. And I remember being struck many years ago, hearing during a question period where Srila Prabhupada, after a talk, he asked for questions, and one of the devotees asked him if he could please tell them more about the Rasa-lila. And Prabhupada, as I remember it, Prabhupada asked him to repeat his question. Well, could you tell us something more about the Rasa-lila? And Srila Prabhupada declined by saying, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not discuss this even among Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar, Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. So, the point he was making was that this was something that even Lord Chaitanya discussed, not even with Nityananda Prabhu or Dvaitacharya Gadadhar, Srivas, or any of those, who we consider intimate associates, the members of the Pancha Tattva. But he only discussed them with 3 or 4 devotees. So Damodar Goswami, Ramananda Roy, Shiki Mahiti and his sister Madhavi Devi. Outside that very, very small circle, as far as we know, Lord Chaitanya did not discuss such topics. So, and the reason given is that it's a pastime which is very easy to misunderstand, because we're conditioned. We're conditioned to hearing romantic stories. We like these. There's a whole genre of books. I was going to say literature. I guess it's literature in a very broad sense. These romantic novels. I think they call them bodice rippers or something like that, because they get the lovers get very passionate. I don't think I've ever read one. My mom had a collection of them along with all her murder mysteries. But there's a whole genre of literature, and then we've in film we have the romantic comedy, the rom-com, and so we love these stories, and we tend to try to identify with the heroes and the heroines, and that's exactly the problem with hearing the Rasa-lila outside the proper method, because there is some danger of imposing our own ideas on that, and thinking that perhaps well, there are a couple of ways to approach this. Some may think that, well, perhaps we should, perhaps I can imitate Krishna and dance with many lovely young women. Or maybe a little subtler, but something that still leads to the same problem. Oh, how could I possibly empathize with Radha and Krishna if if I myself am not able to experience this? So they have these kind of paramour relationships that are supposed to be some sort of spiritual, sort of a following the template of Radha and Krishna or something like that. And these folks, as we know, are Prakriti Sahajas. They impose materialistic ideas on the rasa dance. So, and the whole affair between Krishna and the gopis. So, in order to protect us from something like that, Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur were reticent about discussing these things. However, it's not that these things were never discussed, or that the devotees were told that they had no access to these things at any point in their lives. Generally, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's instruction was that not to read these particular sections of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita unless you're reading straight through. If you're reading straight through and you encounter those chapters, that's fine. But to make a deliberate effort to sit around and so-called relish Krishna's pastimes with the gopis was not a good idea among devotees who were not spiritually mature. That said, there was an instance where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, uncharacteristically, I guess, because it seems uncharacteristic because of the way he introduces it. This was on the Braja Mandala Parikram in 1932, and this was spoken at Radha Kunda. Now, at Radha Kunda in previous years, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur typically would discuss Dhruva Charitra or Prahlada Charitra, something a little more fundamental. so that devotees could become purified. But in 1932, he chose to speak about the Rasa-lila. So there's a short transcript, which is, I guess, kind of a preface to his discussions of Krishna's Lila at Radhakund in 1932. So he wrote, "All these days we have spoken about Lila. Why? Because this is our most confidential asset. This is our only sadhya. This is our only attainment, our only goal. But one should not make the mistake of thinking that anartha nivritti is the prayojana. One thinking like this will never enter into artha pravritti. For this reason, I will begin speaking about Ashtakaliya Lila." This is something Srila Saraswati Thakur generally just did not do. But he says, we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that anartha nivritti is the goal of our life. Not indulging in sinful activity and things like that. This is anartha nivritti is a stage of bhakti, but once we get past anartha nivritti to nishta and the higher stages of bhakti, ruchi, asakti, and then ultimately bhava and prema, we should be willing to hear these things in the proper company, in the proper way. So he says, I know that you are not ready to hear it, but we should know that such a transcendental idea exists within the realm of devotion. This is why anartha nivritti is essential. After the realm of anartha nivritti is artha pravritti. So artha pravritti means embracing those things which actually do have real value. And so he says, after the realm of anartha nivritti is artha pravritti, pure conjugal service to Radha and Krishna. This is transcendental reality. If we do not know of this transcendental realm, then all of our efforts may end in nirvisheshavad. So this undifferentiated, this sayujya mukti, which is not just the least desirable thing for Vaishnavas, but the absolutely most undesirable thing. Because in such a state, there is no access to any kind of bhakti, any kind of devotional service to Krishna. So Srila Saraswati Thakur continues, do not let your days pass in trying for anartha nivritti. Artha pravritti is also necessary. Anartha nivritti is necessary until artha pravritti has started. When artha pravritti is present, anartha nivritti becomes unimportant. Artha pravritti becomes prominent. Those who have chanted Harinam for 15 or 20 years should know such things. The beginners need not hear these topics, for they will misunderstand. These topics are for certain audiences, not all. Also, it is said, Apana bhajana katana kahibe jatanata, ajatatata. One should not reveal one's bhajan to others. If we disregard this instruction of our previous acharyas, then there may be a permanent fall from the realm of devotional service. So many of us have seen examples of immature devotees assuming that they're able to relish these topics once having heard them, or after reading them a number of times, and they're eager to go around about Krishna's dalliances with the gopis, about the Rasa-lila, and so many other things. But this is exactly what Srila Saraswati Thakur is warning against here. He says, one should not reveal one's bhajan to others. So, we can tell whether someone's mature or not by the extent to which they share the things that happen to them internally as a result of their sadhana. except occasionally to encourage others or to glorify bhakti or the bhaktas. One example of, that we see of such a thing is Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, writing in Chaitanya Charitamrita in the how Sri Nityananda Prabhu came to him, gave him instruction, sent him to Vrindavan. And he prefaces that by saying, it's not decent to discuss such things publicly. But if I don't, you may not be able to understand the extent of Sri Nityananda Prabhu's mercy. That even a fallen wretch like me can be fit to receive Lord Nityananda's mercy. And a few years ago, I believe the year following my accepting sannyas from Tripurari Maharaj, there's a Vyasa Puja book published by ISKCON followers. They call it an open Vyasa Puja book. So you don't have to be, and I think it's just for those who are disciples of Srila Prabhupada, a place where we can make offerings without having to have some official position in ISKCON, being a temple president or, I don't know, a BBT trustee or a sannyasi or a GBC member or something like that. Now, back when I first joined, those first few years, when there are only, maybe a couple hundred of us in ISKCON, we all wrote Vyasa Puja offerings. I remember in April of 1970, May maybe of 1970, being approached by our temple president, Gaur Sundar, and asked to write an offering glorifying Srila Prabhupada for his Vyasa Puja book. And excuse me, I had lived in the temple 2 months maybe, and actually had taken a couple of weeks off in the middle of that. And so I was thinking, who am I to write a Vyasa Puja offering? And Gaur Sundar saw my question coming, and he said, you're here, you're practicing, you're living in the temple. If you feel like Srila Prabhupada's disciple, then it would be good for you to write an offering. So I wrote some very simple, honest appreciation, which is either, I don't know, either charmingly simple or just simple-minded. I don't really have a sense of which. But and in May, because it took some time to produce, I would have been much happier to have written some July, August. But writing it in May, being so new to full-time practice of Bhakti Yoga, I found it a little intimidating. But I think that might have been the last year where there were individual offerings, and then later there were offerings for the next year. I think 72. There were offerings from the temples, usually written by temple presidents, with the names of all the devotees in that particular temple. So then this the year after I accepted sannyas, it occurred to me, I had heard that some of my godbrothers were saying their disciples were receiving instructions from Srila Prabhupada in dreams. And it was kind of it came off as a bit of a boast in a sense, but I guess it was meant to demonstrate how merciful Srila Prabhupada was. And I had also had a couple of similar experiences, one of which led to my accepting sannyas, where I received some instruction from Srila Prabhupada that definitely pointed in that direction. So here I am. So I thought, following that spirit in Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj, our Goswami, that it might be interesting to demonstrate that Srila Prabhupada's mercy even extends to someone like me. So I shared the dream as I recorded it, when I got out of bed that morning, and wrote it in my journal right away. So I shared that dream because I thought, well, devotees might wonder who is this new Swami and what's he done with our old friend Babru. And so I thought I would explain how this came to pass, and thereby, although it's not decent to share such things, I was sharing them with my godbrothers, primarily with my godbrothers and godsisters. I haven't shared it more widely than that. Occasionally with a close friend or an old friend or something like that, they would ask me how it happened that someone like me came to accept the sannyas ashram. So I would share that. So these confidential things generally aren't shared very broadly. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur continues, by removing the clothes of the gopis, Krishna obtained happiness. This is Krishna's sense gratification. We cannot ask, why is he a sense enjoyer? Let us see Krishna display the behavior of controlling his senses. Krishna will not become a slave to our desires. Krishna, by his own will, can show sense restraint. He did so in his form as Gaur-Sundar. By that example, he is informing us that no one except Krishna has the right to remove the clothes of the gopis. Our duty is to cultivate devotional service. Do not think that Ashtakali Lila Smarana is the property of the Sahajas. Actually, it is our affair. It has to be retrieved from the hands of the Sahajas. Our Sri Guru Pada Padma heard these things from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That is why he used to tell us various confidential things. We have heard the last instructions from our Sri Gurudev. He said, living in Radha, so this Sri Gurudev, as we know, is Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, who was also an intimate associate and Shiksha disciple of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he said, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji told Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, living in Radha Kunda would be pleasant if you can deliver it from the hands of 11 immoral men. And then he closed this by saying, now perhaps 11 has increased to 108. So here is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, from whom the strictness of our lineage in discussing these things actually is derived. It's actually, the tone that he intended to set. But he also said, we need to hear about these things. We need to know about these things. And what we find in the comments of our acharyas on the Rasa-lila is that this is very, very powerful medicine. Generally, reading a teaching by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that said that generally you need to be free my connection's unstable. So bear with me a moment while I switch networks. Somehow or other it went default to the wrong network. Okay, this should be stronger, and I hope I'm still on Zoom. Somebody give me a thumbs up if I'm still.
You're good.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, we understand that that hearing the Rasa-lila in the proper way is actually very powerful medicine. We know, we've heard from Guru Maharaj a number of times that At the very end of the Rasa-lila, the very end of the 33rd chapter, this last of the Shukadev Goswami, how is it that the Lord, who gives us access, who's actually the protector, not only gives us access to Dharma, but he's the protector and propounder of all Dharma. How is it that he can behave like this with other people's wives? Touching, I think the way he puts it is touching other people's wives. And he explains, that this, might set the wrong tone. Now, the Acharyas explain that King Parikshit is asking this question, not because he thinks it's improper to have heard this, but because he understands that the audience is quite varied. When King Parikshit was cursed by the immature Brahmin, son of the Brahmin, named the boy was named Sringi, to die in 7 days, he just walked away from his kingdom. He walked away from everything, his wife, family, all his possessions, and went and sat down on the bank of the river. Some say the bank of the Ganga, some say the bank of the Jamuna. To fast from all food and drink, even water, until that snake bird came to bite him. So, and we know what happened. Shukadev Goswami appeared, and when the sages and devatas all over the universe saw what was going on, as Guru Maharaj said the other day, you can imagine what it would be like if President Biden walked away from the White House, walked away from his office, his wife, and all his responsibilities. And I think he usually uses the Mississippi. As someone who grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, I would probably suggest the Potomac if I were giving the examples, but sat down on the bank of a great river to fast till death and want to hear only Krishna Katha. When Shukadev arrived, King Parikshit had questions. And his first question, the essential question, is what is the duty of someone who's about to die? In other words, what is our ultimate responsibility as human beings? And then the whole Srimad Bhagavatam unfolds. And then we get to this very confidential part, just like we see in the Bhagavad Gita, the 9th chapter, the most confidential knowledge, Srila Prabhupada called it, where Krishna starts out by saying, okay, now I'm going to tell you something very confidential. This is really secret, almost on the level if I tell you I have to kill you or something like that. This is very, very secret. And he goes through the whole 9th chapter glorifying bhakti and building up to this. And then he gets toward the end of the chapter and he says, okay, buckle up because here it comes. And then what's the big secret? Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Just love me. Kind of boils down to that. Manmana, engage your mind in thinking of me. Manmana bhava madbhakta, become my devotee. Offer your obeisances to me. Worship only me. And then at the end of the 18th chapter, he says the same. He says something similar as he approaches the end of the chapter. He says, now I'm going to tell you the most confidential of all confidential things. So you need to prepare yourself for this. Hear me very carefully. Fasten your seatbelt. This is going to be intense. And what does he say? And then he tells us what that means in practical terms. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Just completely set aside all conventional ideas of dharma. which the Bhagavatam tells us to follow up. The Bhagavatam, if we see it as the philosophical sequel, as Guru Maharaj has suggested so many times, see it as the philosophical sequel to the Bhagavad Gita. It actually picks up in the very next step, just after Krishna's final instruction in the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavatam says, begins in the second verse, the Vastu Nirdesha shloka, after the Namaskar shloka. It says, Dharma projita koitavotra paramo niramatsaranam satam. So it's telling us who is the most fit audience, the most appropriate audience for this particular text. And who is it? Dharma praujhita kaitava. Someone who has already completely rejected these kaitava dharmas. So he says it even more plainly, not just sarva dharma, but all cheating religion, anything that's driven by any kind of self-interest, even in the guise of spirituality or religion. Completely reject it. Praujhita means the same thing as parityaja. Completely reject. Just turn your back on it. So here's a text for those who have already turned their backs on these things. They don't have to be perfect at it, but at least their only aspiration now is Krishna bhakti. And what makes them fit? Their hearts are completely pure. They're satam. Their hearts are pure because they're free from envy. And why are they free from envy? Because they've completely rejected anything that has a tinge of self-interest. They don't want to grow there anymore. And as I occasionally point out, maybe too occasionally, for some folks, when Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj addresses this in chapter 22 of the Madhya-lila of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, when Krishnadas Kaviraj discusses the second verse of the Bhagavatam, he says, so what do we mean by Kaitava Dharma? Kaitava Dharma means Dharma Artha Kama Moksha Vansha. It means the pursuit of virtue and the material progress that it might afford us, and the pleasure, the sense enjoyment that would afford us, and even liberation, trying to become free from suffering. When we come to the point where we understand that this whole material setup, if we indulge in it on its own terms, is just a scam. That all the things that we become attached to are dukkha yonaya eva. They're certainly, that attachment is the source of our suffering. As Guru Maharaj likes to put it, he likes to literally use the word yona, that yoni not as just as source, but as the womb from which all our troubles are born. So the Bhagavatam tells us straight out that it's people who don't, who are giving, who have actually embraced the process of giving up all sorts of cheating religion. These folks are fit to hear the Bhagavatam because their hearts are completely pure. They're completely free of envy, including envy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then, as we know, at the very end, as I began to discuss a few minutes ago, at the very end of the Rasa-lila, King Parikshit poses this question, recognizing that among these sages and devatas, they're not all Shuddha Bhaktas. They're not all engaged in Uttama Bhakti as defined in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. They're people who are interested in this spectacle of the emperor of the world, the most powerful, materially most powerful person on the planet, giving everything up to sit down and hear Srimad Bhagavatam. So recognizing that some of them may have very mixed, some of them may be very materialistic, may be very easily inclined to understand the dealings of Krishna with the gopis of Vrindavan as something like what we might read in a Bodhisattva or see in a rom-com, It's something altogether different. It's cut out of a completely different cloth, I guess. It has nothing whatsoever to do. It is exactly the opposite of everything we can conceive of when we conceive of love. So Shukadev Goswami, in the very last verse of the Rasa Panchadhyaya, Shukadev Goswami says, Vikriditam Braja Vadubhiridam Vishnu. Sorry, I have this on. I have to change pages. Shradhan Vito Nushrunuyad Atavarna Yadyaha. Bhaktim Param Bhagavati Pratilabhya Kamam Ridrogam Ashvapi Apahi Notya Chidena Dhiraha. He says, one who faithfully hears or describes the Lord's playful affairs with the young gopis of Vrindavan will attain the Lord's pure devotional service. Thus he will quickly become sober and conquer lust, the disease of the heart. So he refers to these as, in the first pada, vikriditam, this play, this lila of the Lord with the Brajavadhus, with the ladies of Vrindavan. This is the play of Vishnu, he says. And the acharyas point out that he refers to the Lord as Vishnu, if for no other reason than that he is all-pervading. And how do we know that this was the all-pervading Vishnu who engaged in the Rasa-lila? He was able to dance with each one of the millions and uncountable millions of gopis. He was able to dance with each one of them individually, according to what she needed. So this is something that can only be done by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, I've just a couple of things here. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out one who continuously hears and glorifies or writes in poetry this autumn Rasa-lila and other similar pastimes, and other pastimes described elsewhere by other poets of Krishna, who spread himself out among all the gopis, Vishnu, one who pervades, attains the first appearance of prema, even within this condition of having material desire. And some of the acharyas have pointed out that, generally we would consider that you need to be free of lust, free of all material desire. Lust doesn't just mean sexual lust, but we're talking about anything that revolves around however I conceive of myself. They say that generally they say you may need to be free of personal desire, be free of personal interest, of any kind of lust, in order to appreciate the Rasa-lila. However, Shukadev Goswami says that anyone who faithfully hears this or recites it or shares it with others, that they very quickly attain prema. So what are we talking about here? Well, when he says faithfully, what he means is hearing in the proper frame of mind from the proper source. In his introduction to aesthetic Vedanta, Guru Maharaj points out, Srila Tripurari Maharaj points out that that means hearing from mature devotees. That means hearing from the spiritual master who has some realization of these things. And hearing submissively, just as we see in the Bhagavad Gita. There are three elements that are necessary in our approach to the Guru. Pardon me. So the Gita, in the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. Upadekshanti te jnanam, jnaninos tattva darshana. So it says that you should approach a bona fide spiritual master with three things. Three characteristics should be there in your approach. Pranipat, submission. And submission is externally expressed by offering dandavat pranams. Pariprashna, relevant inquiries, just as we see here in King Pariksit, and all the stories nested into however many levels. This is a project I've just assigned myself. It's something I've talked about for years, and somebody called me on it, and I said, okay, I need to go through the Bhagavatam. And so this, I know this has already been done, but I thought if I were to do it myself, it would cement it more firmly in my own heart rather than looking at a chart someone else might have done. But I think sometimes that the stories go 5 or 6 layers deep in the narrative. These stories nested one inside another, like matryoshka dolls, those Russian nested dolls. You buy a big doll and you take the top off, and there's a smaller doll in there. Sometimes you'd see Khrushchev and then Stalin and then Lenin and then maybe Marx or something, I don't know. So this is something that's probably been around for, I don't know, 130, 140 years, and part of Russian culture. So the, excuse me, this must be a signal that my time is approaching. You know, we see all these stories nested. There are always questions and answers. And we see it in every canto, that someone asks, Pariksit asks Shukadev a question, Shukadev tells a story about when somebody else asked that question, in which there's another story embedded when somebody else may have asked a similar question, and here's the answer that was given. That's only 3 layers, and I think it goes 1 or 2 more than that in a number of occasions throughout the Bhagavatam. But there are always these questions, relevant questions. And the most relevant question, as I mentioned earlier, is what is our ultimate business? What is our real business as human beings? And then the third element is seva, service. And these 3 things constitute the relationship between guru and disciple. So we want to approach a guru who actually has some realization with relevant questions, submissively, with an open heart, ready to hear what the sadhu has to say, with relevant questions, and with an eagerness to serve. Chanakya Pandit writes in his Niti Shastra, his common sense, book of common sense sayings, aphorisms, that just as we get water from a well by digging, in a similar way, we get knowledge from the guru by service. So the questions are there, and that's a good thing. The open, submissive heart is there, but there also needs to be service. There needs to be like some real reciprocation between the teacher and the student. So we want to hear about the Rasa-lila in the proper state of mind, from a source who can give it to us as it is meant to be understood. And there's so many things to understand from the Rasa-lila. I can only touch on a few things over the next 3 weeks, but I thought I first would talk about why we're discussing this very confidential pastime, because it is such powerful medicine that, where did it go? Vishwanath Chakra, I think it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, or maybe it's Sanatana Goswami, that writes that even if you, he says, the word Yahahu indicates that it does not depend on qualification. Anyone who hears, chants, or remembers will attain at every moment ever new prema. He will destroy desire, which is the disease of the heart. And then he says this excludes desire directed to Lord Krishna, since we're talking about self-interested desire. So desire that's all about Krishna, that's actually pure bhakti. And this happens even if we come if we approach it still with our material disease. If we approach the proper person with the proper attitude, then we will get from hearing about the Rasa-lila what it's meant to deliver to us. Just what Sukadeva Goswami intended to share by revealing these pastimes to King Parikshit. I thought I would share just a couple of snippets from the introduction to aesthetic Vedanta that might help us understand how to approach the Rasa Panchadhyaya. So he writes, this is the Gopis' love and Radha's love in particular are exclusively featured in this section of the Bhagavatam, the Rasa Panchadhyaya. Radha is love, selfless and pure. She personifies that which brings God and humanity together to taste love. In doing so, she emerges bringing victory to Krishna over Cupid or Kama, lust. Then he explains, lust is that selfish desire that passes as love for as long as and to the extent that God is not present in the human equation. So, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll read that again. Thank you. So Guru Maharaj writes, lust is that selfish desire that passes as love for as long as and to the extent that God is not present in the human equation. So to the extent, as long as, and to the extent to which our hearts are not dedicated to the service of the Supreme, the Absolute Truth, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to that extent, our desires will be selfish. And that's what we call lust. And then he writes a little later, the love of the gopis that appears outwardly like lust is the secret of Braja. It is never played out in the open. The very nature of the highest love is that it hides itself. So I mentioned earlier that we can understand if someone's not quite mature, if they come and very eagerly want to share with us some new insight they got into the Rasa-lila. Well, I was reading Govinda Lilamrita last night, and this thing, this idea came to me, and so we can understand that this is probably not somebody we want to discuss the Rasa-lila with too much. So it is never played out in the open. The very nature of the highest love is that it hides itself. We're admonished not to share our bhajan, as we heard from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. It is so cleverly hidden in the guise of lust that even the rishis often do not think to look for it within Krishna Lila. The gopis' love is hidden even from other inhabitants of Vrindavan. Although a number of Braja's eternal residents have direct knowledge of Krishna and the gopis' mutual love, they are careful to keep the secret, lest it be known publicly by all and stripped of the veil that serves to enhance its experience. So when we have an illicit affair with someone in this world, part of it, I would assume part of the thrill is the secret that the two of you share. So it's something like that with Krishna, but without any kind of contamination. The Rasa-lila has nothing to do with this world. This is Krishna's, it's an expression of Sharanagati. I was speaking as we approach Govardhan Puja, and here in Honolulu, we're putting on a drama tomorrow night in 4 parts to glorify the Govardhan Lila. And one of the things that I've shared with the devotees here in the last couple of classes that I've given is that one of the lessons that I just got the Spanish. I don't know how, somehow or other, I just heard a crew. One of the lessons we can take away from the Govardhan Lila is that of Sharanagati, that of surrender. Krishna insisted that the residents of Vrindavan give up their Indra puja, give up their Indra worship, and depend only on him, Govardhan Hill, and the cows, and the pastures of Vrindavan. So we know that Govardhan is non-different from Krishna, while at the same time he is the best of Krishna's servants. I was just reading from Gopal Champu yesterday. There's a list in the very first chapter of different ways that Govardhan is glorious. It's so wonderful. But so when we think of the Rasa Panchadhyaya, when we think of the Rasa-lila, we can also understand this is perhaps the pinnacle of surrender. And the aspect that's particularly prominent here in my vision is Atma Nivedana or Atma Nikshepa, giving up all personal interest. One of the chapters, the 31st chapter, known as the Gopi Gita, the gopis are admonishing Krishna. They're glorifying Krishna and complaining, sometimes even accusing at the same time. Only a cheater like you would call young women out into the middle of, to the dead of night with this loud sound of his flute. And they tell him, we've given up everything to come here and be with you. We've given up our husbands, our children, our households, our families, everything. Practically, we're ruining the reputation of the village of Vrindavan by coming out here to be with you at night. So this is what, one of the things that we can learn from the Rasa-lila when we hear it properly is self-surrender, and particularly Atma Nikshepa or Atma Nivedana, completely casting away all self-interest. Prabhupada sometimes translated Atma Nivedana when he was just discussing the 6 aspects of Sharanagati as having no interest other than the Lord's interest. So this is something that we can look out for as we examine different aspects of Krishna's Rasa-lila. I see that it is the bottom of the hour, and so this is a good time for me to stop and entertain any discussion or questions, whatever we have. So I think Shamananda and Sakyarati have the settings so that you can unmute yourself if you have a question or comment.
Yes, I'll still be able to unmute now. Just make sure you're in English if you want to say something.
Okay, I think that's a long enough silence to assume that there is nothing further this morning. So I guess we can adjourn and meet back here again next Thursday. And I want to thank you all. I'm particularly grateful to Padmanabha Maharaj, my dear friend, for being bold enough and merciful enough to engage me in doing this, because I realize if I'm going to discuss the Rasa-lila for 4 hours over the month of November, I have to dive into it. And we know that especially in Kartik, this is part of the Kartik theme, Padmanabha Maharaj's Kartik theme, that many devotees in Vrindavan especially, they recite this 31st chapter daily, the Gopi Gita. And this is something that I've been doing for, gosh, I don't remember how many years, at least 10 years. And somehow or other this year, there's some devotees who seem quite affectionate to me. They seem a little attached to me. And so I invited them to join me in this, in this sankalpa, in this part of my my Kartik Vrat, and it has been so sweet to actually share this. At first I said, okay, I'll chant the Sanskrit, and then you guys can read the translation. And on the third day, I heard one of the devotees singing with me under her breath, and I thought, oh, okay. So the next evening, I said, okay, so maybe what we can do is just go around. Each of us can, we'll take turns chanting the verses and translations, and they got it just like that. They got, that sometimes we have to, especially with the last verse, which has a completely different meter, have to remind them of how to take that same theme from the tune that we use for the other verses and kind of stretch it out over that last verse in the Gopi Gita. So just as chanting Gopi Gita is a common practice among Gaudiya Vaishnavas during Kartik, so getting together and in the proper mood, discussing the Rasa-lila can be a very powerful way of cleansing our hearts and helping us make progress in devotional service. So I'm more grateful than I can gracefully say to Padmanabha Maharaj for giving me this engagement, and to you, my dear friends, for joining me in this part of my Kartik Vrat. So with that, I thank you again, and I will excuse myself. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Jai Sripad Bhakti Abhay Ashram Maharaj ki Jai.
Jai Ho. Hare Krishna.